All right, hello everybody. So you're watching this video because you want to understand a couple different things. Number one, what is an ingress? Number two, why should you use it? And I'll try to cover those very, very briefly without going too much into the detail. So first things first, what is an ingress? Well, actually, it's both a concept that describes a couple different things as well as an actual object in the world of Kubernetes. So to describe it artificially, it's the thing. The ingress is the thing that will get traffic into your Kubernetes cluster from outside of it. And so there's a couple different mechanisms to do that. But basically, think of if we're looking at the screen here. So we have a Kubernetes cluster, and we use an ingress to route requests into our to our pods through our services. And you can see node port. If you're familiar with that, that's one way of doing that. If you're not, no worries. You can even think of a load balancer as an ingress, or an ingress as an ingress. And if I'm confusing you, that's fine. Don't worry too much. All of it will make sense shortly. And so, again, the what is we are using. An ingress is used to get traffic into our Kubernetes cluster. So let's take a look at a working example here. So we have a repository that I'll link in the description, and we're going to go ahead and follow this through. We're going to first create a new namespace, and then we're going to deploy all of our APIs and API gateway into that namespace. And if you're wondering what an API gateway is, it's not important right now. It'll make sense shortly. All right, so we're going to set the default namespace to apps. Okay. So let's do one thing. So let's take a look at our deployments. You can see we have another API, my REST API, a third API, and that's what we're going to focus on. So we've deployed these into my Kubernetes cluster, which is running in AWS, but where it's running doesn't matter. The point is it's in some Kubernetes cluster. And now we have to figure out, how do we actually access these APIs that are running inside my cluster? So let's take a look at the services. So kubectl, or K for short, because I said an alias, get services. And we can see each of my APIs has a service. So we use this service to access our pods. So for example, my REST API has a service with a cluster IP, but it has no external IP. And so that's why I need an ingress to get access to it. So one way I can get access to it is, for example, if I do a kubectl port forward to the service, my REST API, and open this up, what's going to happen is we're going to open up a tunnel from our laptop to that service that's running in the AWS Kubernetes cluster. And now I can actually make a curl directly to it. So if I want the get endpoint on my API, I get some JSON data back. So that's one way, but I mean, that's not feasible, right? So that lets me access my API, but what if I need to open it up for other people, such as the internet or some front-end application that we're building? So in order to do that, we have to make it publicly accessible. And the first way that we're going to do that is we could simply switch the so kubectl get services. So we can switch the type of the service from a cluster IP to a load balancer. So what that does is automatically on AWS, on Azure, on Google's Kubernetes managed services, if you set a service type to load balancer, there's a controller that's listening in the background. And as soon as it sees the load balancer type, it's actually going to give a public facing IP to our internal services. So for example, here's my REST API, my service kind. Now here under type, I'm going to switch this from cluster IP to load balancer, and then we're going to do a kubectl apply. And you can see this service got configured. And so now if I do kubectl get services, you can see that my REST API is type load balancer, but most importantly, it has a public IP. And we can actually use this now. So instead of opening up a tunnel on my laptop with port forward, we can access this directly anywhere on the internet. So that's not going to work. It takes a couple minutes for AWS to spin up the resource, as well as for the domain name to propagate. So if we had waited a minute or two, this would work. But the point is you now understand. Okay, great. So we have we can switch our service type to load balancer. Now, what this actually does, if we go to the AWS console or whatever cloud you're using, you can see that there's an actual load balancer resource that's been spun up. So this is the first way to get traffic into our cluster, but it's not ideal. How come? Well, in my example, I only have 3 APIs, but imagine you are a company that has dozens or even hundreds of APIs, which is, a very common use case. Well, it's very expensive to have one load balancer for each of your APIs. Typically, these load balancers are charged per hour. And so those costs can rack up quickly. Also, that's the main reason we're not going to go into the others, actually. And so how do we fix this? What's the next step up? Well, the next step is to use an actual ingress, or in other words, an API gateway. So the API gateway is going to act as the doorway into our Kubernetes cluster. We can make API calls and all of them go through the API gateway, which we'll call the ingress moving forward. And that will route traffic to the different Kubernetes services running in my cluster. And what that means is we no longer need these load balancer types for all of my internal services. We can just put it on the API gateway and we're good to go. So the service, let's delete that kubectl, delete service in my apps namespace, and that's my REST API. And that's just gonna let us recreate it. We'll let that go. There it goes, it's now deleted. So I'll do an apply again and it's gonna recreate that service with a cluster IP, and now the resource should be gone. And we just have the one for the API gateway. So you can see, if I do kubectl get services, we can see that the Tyke, that's my API gateway. I'm using an open source API gateway called Tyke. It's full disclosure, the company which I work for, as a load balancer, and that gives me a public IP. And so there's a couple reasons for us doing this. So now let's do that again. Let's grab our public IP, and now I can go directly to my API gateway on port 8080, which is where the service is listening. And now I want my REST API, and to get that same endpoint as last time, I just add it to the end. Now I want that get endpoint, and there we go. And so what's happened here is that I made an API call to my Ingress, which is the Tyke API gateway. It received the API request and then routed the request to my REST API based off of the path that I added here. And there's a couple different ways to route traffic. We can also use the domain name, but that's not that's out of scope for this video. Okay, so there's my REST API. If I want my another API, it takes me to that another API, and so on. And that's it. Tune in for part 2 of the video where I can show you what are some of the added benefits that we get with an API gateway. Thanks for watching.